Under my Instagram short video, a girl commented, tagging her boyfriend to see it. "I'm sharing this beauty with my husband, he's into this type." I clicked on her profile, and my heart stopped. She was the girl who had bullied me in high school. That face. I'd recognize it anywhere, even if it were reduced to dust. I spent the whole night scrolling through every post and video on her profile. Then clicked on her boyfriend's page. I sent him a message. Hi. Before I saw Selena again, I had imagined many times what she would be like now. I thought bad people would eventually get what they deserved, living a life of misery and poverty. But no. In the videos she posted, one day she was staying in a luxury hotel in the Maldives, the kind that costs thousands per night. The next day, she was in Iceland, watching the northern lights. A few days later, she was speeding along the west coast in a sports car, chasing the sunset. In her latest post, she was sitting in a black Rolls-Royce, wearing a Chanel suit, smiling confidently at the camera, with no signs of worry. She looked like she was doing incredibly well. But why? I stared at her smiling face on the screen, and slowly, that smile morphed into the one she used to have in high school, laughing while slapping me, one hit after another. She'd pass it off to someone else when her hand got tired. She'd laugh beside me, holding up the camera to film my swollen, bloodied face. "Come on, smile, Rachel. Isn't this what you love doing? Why the silence now?" She yanked my hair, her grin growing wider. "Give me a smile. Right now." Selena's cruelty toward me began when the boy she liked gave me a birthday gift. He gave me a bag, worth over €6,000, which his mom had apparently bought on a whim. I was terrified and refused to take it, but he tossed it at me, saying if I didn't want it, fine, he'd just throw it away. As I stood there, unsure what to do, Selena walked in. She snatched the bag from my hands, glanced at it, then broke into a twisted smile that made my blood run cold. "I asked him for this bag for months, but he never gave it to me. I didn't expect it to be for you." She looked at me with eyes that made my skin crawl. "Rachel, good for you." From that moment on, Selena relentlessly targeted me. The worst part of my day was always after school, not knowing when she and her friends would trap me in the bathroom to beat and humiliate me. I lived in fear. My nights filled with nightmares, but I couldn't tell anyone. My parents had divorced when I was young. They both remarried, and the only one who wanted me was my crippled grandmother. She ran a small bakery, waking up early every morning to bake bread so I could attend school. I was one of the few students admitted to this private school on a scholarship due to my grades. I couldn't tell anyone, not even the teachers. Because Selena used my grandmother to threaten me, and I knew the school would turn a blind eye, since Selena had connections. All I could do was study harder, hoping that one day I could escape this place by going to university far away. But in the end, even that small hope was dashed. The night before the college entrance exam, Selena locked me in the restroom again. This time, she had someone strip me of my clothes and take photos. That night, I was stuck in the restroom, unaware that the photos were already circulating in various local group chats. I didn't know that Selena had shown the pictures to my grandmother at her shop either. Grandma was so worried because I hadn't come home, she hobbled to the school, dragging her bad leg with each painful step. In her rush, she didn't look both ways when crossing the street, and a tired truck driver ran her over and crushed her. She died instantly. I didn't find out until the next morning when the school janitor let me out. I was dizzy, my vision blurred, and I collapsed to the floor, my mind in a fog. When I came to, I was in the hospital. In just one day, I lost both my chance at a better future and my grandmother, the one person who had been by my side. The details of what happened next are a blur to me, likely because my body's pain triggered a defense mechanism that erased the memories. The only thing I remember is hearing the teacher say in the hallway, "She could have applied to Harvard, such a pity." But Selena faced no consequences. She was only called into the principal's office and scolded. Her father was a powerful local businessman, and the principal was too afraid to cross him. I used the last of my money to bury grandma, but I couldn't pay my tuition anymore, so I took a job washing dishes to survive. Meanwhile, Selena went abroad to study, beginning her luxurious life. I sat in my room, the lights off, staring blankly at the ceiling. Those were the hardest years, and I often found myself lost in thought, just like that. Eventually, life got easier. I started earning money, re-enrolled in school to study business management, saved up enough to open my own women's boutique, and ran my Instagram account. I styled clothes, modeled them myself, took photos, and shared them online. Thanks to my looks and growing popularity, my business flourished, and I achieved financial independence. I thought I had left the past behind me. That I could finally start fresh. But when I saw Selena's face again, I realized I'd never truly moved on. I hated her. I hated her more than anything. I stayed up all night, my fingers trembling, before finally clicking on her boyfriend's profile. His profile picture was simple, a few minimalist lines, and his account was completely empty. But I quickly learned who he was. Brian Livingston. Selena's fiancé. Selena's family had nearly gone bankrupt during her college years, only surviving thanks to an advantageous marriage alliance. The Livingston family was their ticket to stability. That was how Selena's life became so glamorous. She didn't even recognize me anymore, which was almost laughable. She had pushed me into hell herself, and her face haunted me in every nightmare. But she'd forgotten about me. Even sharing my video with Brian. I clicked on the chat icon next to Brian's profile, thought for a moment, and sent him a message. Hi. 3 days later, I opened Brian's chat box for the umpteenth time. No reply. I wasn't surprised. From what I'd gathered over the past few days, Brian seemed to be pretty clean when it came to relationships. Selena probably just made a joke when she said he liked my type, she knew he wouldn't be interested. It's strange though. He's the heir to the Livingston family. Based on the videos and photos I found, he's at least 6'2", and thanks to his celebrity mother, he's got a face that could easily land him a spot in the entertainment industry. For someone like him? A classic rich and handsome guy, his favorite hobby isn't chasing girls, showing off his cars, or flaunting his wealth. It's fishing. Yes, fishing. Just like an old man, he'd head to the beach or a pond, set up a rod, and fish all day. It seemed trying to seduce him online wasn't going to work, so I decided to change my approach. I researched him thoroughly. Even followed him outside his company. Brian's life was pretty predictable. He followed a strict routine, working during the week and spending every weekend fishing. Once I figured out when he finished work, I drove my car behind him, waited for a red light, and crashed into his car. The loud crash made his car stop. Brian, dressed in a suit, frowned and walked over to knock on my window. I quickly brushed my hair. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I'd taken extra time to do my makeup, making sure every eyelash was perfect while keeping it natural. When I opened the door, Brian's frown softened a bit. Selena must have known Brian liked my type and shared my video with him. He probably wouldn't fall for me because of my looks alone, but at least he wouldn't hate me. I raised my head, showing the perfect angle of my face, and nervously apologized, "Sorry. I'm a new driver, and I was too rushed." "Are you all right?" Brian shook his head and walked behind the car to check. "It's not serious. Let's move it so we're not blocking the road. We'll sort out the insurance later." I nodded, and we waited for the insurance people to finish the process. Then, I naturally took out my phone and handed him my number. "If you don't mind, let's add each other on WhatsApp. We can stay in touch if anything comes up." My attitude was so natural that he didn't have a chance to refuse. He hesitated for a moment but still gave me his number. "I'm really sorry about today. Let me buy you a coffee sometime." I looked up at him. "No need. The insurance is handled. Just contact me by phone if anything happens." As I'd expected, he turned me down and left. I watched his car merge with traffic. holding my phone with a small smile on my face. Today's goal was achieved. I didn't expect to get so close to Brian so quickly, but getting his contact information was already a win. I enjoy a challenge. If he had fallen for me too quickly, it wouldn't have been as interesting. I found all of Selena's social media accounts. She really seems to be obsessed with Brian. In almost every photo, he's the main subject. Her obsession with him was clear. Over the years, Selena's father's company had been declining, and if it weren't for the Livingston family's support, it would probably have gone bankrupt. Selena. I'd like to see what would happen if she lost Brian. Would she still be living so comfortably? If God doesn't punish her, I'll do it myself. I spent the entire night going through more information about Brian. It turned out he really was a simple guy with almost no other special hobbies. I didn't message him directly, but I posted a status on WhatsApp that was visible only to him. The photo I posted showed dark lake water rippling in the wind, with me holding a fish and giving a slight smile at the camera. The caption read, "Another fulfilling day." I waited a week. But Brian didn't respond. However, he didn't post any updates that week either, which clearly meant he hadn't caught any fish. In the second week, I posted another photo, this time of an even bigger fish from the same pond. It weighed about 4 or 5 pounds. Today's catch wasn't bad either. Still no response. The third week, I posted again. This place is amazing. There's all kinds of fish here. After posting, I put on a face mask and went to sleep. The next morning, when I checked my phone, I saw the comment I'd been waiting for. Brian had commented, "Where is this?" I smiled as I looked at my phone. It seemed like I had finally caught the real fish. When I met Brian again, he was noticeably more talkative. "Is it really true that there are so many fish in that pond you mentioned?" I casually glanced at him. He was wearing a black hoodie and gray sweatpants, his hair naturally falling over his forehead without any gel. When he talked about something that interested him, his eyes lit up with curiosity. Gone was the cold, aloof demeanor you usually see in business magazines. Instead, he seemed almost like a college student. I nodded. "You'll see for yourself when you go. I've been here so many times. And I've never come back empty-handed." Truthfully, I didn't know anything about fishing. I'd been studying like crazy, just to impress Brian. The pond itself was one I'd found after a lot of research and trial and error. When Brian first commented on my post, I ignored him. The next day, after posting again, I slowly replied, "It's on an island, kind of hard to find." He responded almost instantly, "Could you take me with you next time?" "Thanks." I put down my phone to have dinner, and after a while, guessing he was getting impatient, I replied, "Sure." We stood several meters apart, casting our lines. He didn't initiate any conversation, and I wasn't going to force it either. Whenever one of us caught a fish, we'd glance at each other. I could tell that when I caught one, he was eager to come over and see, but he was too shy to do so, and instead pretended to be nonchalant, glancing around as if nothing special was happening. From Selena's Instagram, it was clear that Brian was the type who didn't engage in things he wasn't interested in, and he wouldn't even bother with polite small talk. Brian had probably grown up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and with his exceptional background, he rarely had to do anything to please others. He was used to everything revolving around him. Over the years, I'm sure there had been plenty of women flocking around him, and if I were too eager, I'd probably just end up like them unnoticed. After I took Brian here once, I didn't reach out to him again, but I figured out when he'd come. I made it a point to be here every day, ensuring we'd run into each other at least once a week. But the waiting was incredibly boring. After our third meeting, he finally started talking to me. "How did you find this place?" I'd been to most of the fishing spots and ponds nearby, but none of them were that interesting. A fishing friend recommended this place to me once, so I decided to give it a try, and it turned out to be pretty good. As soon as fishing came up, Brian became much more talkative. He showed me a video of him fishing for catfish in the Amazon River, which really impressed me. Then I showed him my photos from a tuna fishing trip. His eyes lit up, then he looked a little regretful. I've wanted to go fishing for tuna too, but I've been too busy to find the time. He looked at me, finally meeting my gaze. I didn't expect you to like fishing. It's rare to find girls who enjoy it. We kept talking, and soon we found ourselves discussing sports, music, movies, and books. He was surprised to find that we had so many common interests. We both liked skiing, shared a love for the same author, Violetta Gregg, and both enjoyed Debussy. Even when we disagreed, we understood each other's preferences. Before we knew it, we'd spent the whole afternoon talking, and the sun had already set. After that, we often went fishing together and even adopted a stray kitten. The little yellow kitten, only a few months old, would sit patiently next to us, waiting for the fish. When we caught nothing, it would meow anxiously, as if urging us to try harder. I named it Angel, and every time I came, I'd hug and kiss it. Brian, however, wasn't as fond of the cat. Whenever Angel tried to rub against him, he'd avoid it. He was a bit of a neat freak and didn't like having cat hair on him. That night, as we were saying goodbye, Brian asked me for the first time, "When will you come again?" I thought for a moment and replied, "I've been really busy with work lately, so I'm not sure." I saw a hint of disappointment flash in his eyes, but he nodded politely and didn't press further. I didn't show up the following week, but the week after, I finally came back. When Brian saw me, although his expression didn't change, his actions gave him away. He quickly moved his chair closer to me as soon as he saw me. "You've been gone for a while. Why didn't you come fishing?" I walked over and petted Angel, who was stretching lazily on the ground. Its little belly had grown rounder, and it looked well cared for, with shiny fur. "Have you been feeding it?" Brian raised his chin slightly, his tone a bit reproachful. "You were the one who named it. Yet you haven't been taking care of it these past few days." But he quickly became a little smug again. "Of course, I've been taking care of it. I come every day to catch fish for it." Angel walked over and rubbed against his leg, and Brian frowned, complaining, "Can you stay away from me? You always rub all that fur on me." Yet, without hesitation, he picked up the kitten and placed it on his lap. Angel lay contentedly on him, and instantly, cat hair stuck to his black jacket, but he didn't seem to mind. In fact, he expertly scratched its chin. I watched from the side, and in that moment, I made up my mind. So, he is just a person who looks cold on the surface, but is actually very gentle on the inside. I silently laughed to myself, sitting off to the side with my fishing rod, but I accidentally pricked my hand on the hook. I winced in pain and quickly checked my wound, where a bright red drop of blood appeared. Brian immediately put Angel down, grabbed a band-aid from the box, and walked over with a frown. "You're really careless." I reached out for the band-aid, but without hesitation, he took my hand and said, "Don't move." "You're pretty well prepared," I laughed, looking up, but when I met his gaze, I swallowed the rest of my words. It was too close. Somehow, we had ended up so close. The orange sunset in the mountains gradually turned to blue, dimming as the wind carried the salty, damp scent of the sea. I could smell a faint woody fragrance on Brian. Was it his cologne or aftershave? His eyes were lighter than most people's, with a cold, almost inhuman clarity, but right then, they were filled with the reflection of me. The wind tousled my hair and brushed across his face. He stared at me, motionless, until Angel meowed impatiently from the side. We both snapped back to reality and quickly took a step back. Brian turned away from me, crouching to pet Angel's back. "Are you hungry? I'll get you dinner." I couldn't help but laugh. In the dim light, I noticed his ears had flushed a little. He sat down to fish, without saying another word. But that night, Brian, usually patient, was restless. He didn't catch a single fish the whole evening. From that day on, we seemed to have developed an unspoken connection. Whenever he went fishing, he'd always ask me to join him. We'd go out at least twice a week. Sometimes we'd be in the quiet mountains, other times out on the open sea. But every time, it was just the two of us. During this time, I kept an eye on Selena's Instagram. Her posts about her relationship slowly disappeared, until there were no posts for several days in a row. I watched with a detached coldness, then met with her boyfriend in the best mood, with perfect makeup during the day. This subtle, unspoken understanding between us, where we both knew what was going on but pretended not to, continued to build for 2 months. I felt like it was finally the right time. That night, as Brian held Angel, I suddenly asked, "Brian, do you have a girlfriend?" After I got a definite answer, we ended today's activities in a moment of silence. Once home, I opened my phone and saw that Selena had posted a new update on Instagram. But this time, it wasn't about showing off Brian, it was. Some people are just born to crave other people's men. Don't let me find out who you are. I leaned against the window, exhaled a puff of smoke, and smirked. It looked like they'd had a fight. Selena and Brian's relationship always seemed to be her one-sided pursuit. I went through all of Brian's social media accounts and found not a single post about Selena. What had been a one-sided relationship now had me thrown into the mix. And it was starting to feel unstable. Brian didn't answer my question today, but we both understood what the silence meant. That day, we didn't speak, quickly wrapped up, and went home. But I knew Brian wasn't as calm as his expression suggested. As for whether things would get better or worse, I couldn't predict. Maybe he didn't have strong feelings for Selena, but 2 families of them had a long-standing partnership. And marriage wasn't a trivial matter. He might like me now, but how much? Could it compare to his career? Later that day, Brian sent me a message, "I'm not going fishing anymore. I've been a distraction these past few days." And he kept his word, he never went fishing again. I went to various fishing spots daily, but it seemed he was avoiding me. He didn't show up. Angel was also gone. I wanted to adopt it. But I couldn't find it after searching the area thoroughly. But then, his profile picture changed. It was a picture of an orange cat lying on a carpet, yawning. I zoomed in to take a closer look. It was Angel. Half a month later, I posted a photo on WhatsApp with another man, both of us holding fish. The man in the photo was tall, with honey-colored skin, a black tank top that showed his well-defined chest, and one arm draped over my shoulder. Smiling brightly. He was a male model I hired for €200 for the day. Fishing is about skill, just throwing bait doesn't catch fish. The next day, when I went back to that pond, I suddenly felt a shadow cast beside me. I looked up and saw Brian sitting in the chair next to mine, expressionless, pulling out his fishing rod. He cast the line without a word. But he didn't even put any bait on the hook. We sat there in silence for a long time before he finally spoke. His voice devoid of emotion. "Who was that guy yesterday?" I said nonchalantly, "You have a girlfriend. Why does it matter to you?" He didn't respond. For the next half hour, I caught fish after fish, while Brian didn't catch a single one. It seemed he hadn't noticed he didn't put any bait on his hook. He sat there, lost in thought, with a heavy atmosphere around him. I got up, my legs numb from sitting too long, and almost stumbled. Brian instinctively stood up to catch me. In that moment, our eyes met, and he suddenly grabbed the back of my neck and kissed me. It wasn't romantic. We were just 2 unskilled fishermen, surrounded by water and fish, and an awkward kiss. Rather than a kiss, it felt more like a struggle, his anger coming through forcefully. I refused to back down. Wrapping my arms around his neck and standing on tiptoe. I don't know how long it lasted, but just when I was on the verge of fainting from lack of air, he released me. Gasping for breath, I looked up at him. "Brian, I'm not going to be a mistress." His eyes were tinged with red, and it took a while for him to calm his breathing. "I know. I don't want to make excuses. But I need to be clear with you. She was arranged by my family." I don't have feelings for her, and I'll tell her that. Give me some time. That night, I checked Selena's social media again. She hadn't posted anything. It was quiet. But I knew she was probably struggling. Sure enough, later that night, she posted several updates filled with frustrated words, ending with, "Wait, I won't let this go." Before I received Brian's explanation, Selena beat me to it. Somehow, she had found my contact information and asked me to meet her at a coffee shop. When I saw her again, she was still impeccably dressed, wearing a Max Mara coat and a Cartier diamond-studded bracelet. Her eyeliner was sharply winged, and her eyes were filled with an intense, piercing gaze. But despite all her efforts, the dark circles beneath her eyes were still visible. She looked me up and down with disdain before sneering, "You're just one of those women I've seen so many times. So, tell me, what will it take for you to stay away from him?" I casually pushed a strand of hair over my shoulder. She still didn't recognize me. But that wasn't surprising. After everything that had happened, I had changed my name. Gotten plastic surgery to alter the shape of my eyes, and over the years, I had dressed better and become wealthier. I didn't look like the same person anymore, and her not recognizing me was to be expected. After all, victims never forget the faces of those who wronged them, but the wrongdoers often don't even notice the victim's face. I lowered my head to sip my tea and smiled at her. "You must be Selena, right? I've heard of you. Brian told me that your relationship is just a family arrangement, and that he doesn't have any feelings for you." As expected, those words immediately enraged her. Selena's face darkened. "So, you enjoy being a mistress? Tell me, how much do you like being a slut?" She spat. I kept smiling, meeting her gaze with unwavering calm. "Maybe the one who isn't loved is the real mistress. What do you think, Miss Selena?" Fury flashed across Selena's face. Without warning, she grabbed a glass of water from the table and splashed it over my head. The scalding coffee made me dizzy for a moment, reminding me of the time she had poured boiling water on me back then. People nearby turned to look at us, but Selena didn't care about the attention. She grabbed my hair and raised her hand, ready to slap me across the face. I could almost imagine the strength behind that slap. After all, I'd been on the receiving end of many similar slaps during high school. But this time, I blocked her wrist. In her stunned moment, I struck her across the face with all my might. "You dare hit me?" she yelled, her face still frozen in disbelief. I had never seen Selena look so confused and furious. But I didn't care. I hit her again. A sharp slap echoing through the room. This time, her face was left red and swollen, her eyes wide with shock. "So what if I hit you?" I said, still smiling, leaning forward onto the table, with a gleam of triumph in my eyes. "Not only will I slap you, but I'm going to take your man." "What are you going to do about it?" Selena seemed on the verge of a breakdown. She raised her hand to strike again, but this time, before her arm could even reach me, someone grabbed it forcefully. She turned around, and my eyes met Brian's. I bit my lip, not believing what I was seeing. I had never seen him this angry before. His gaze was burning with fury. "I told you this has nothing to do with her." Brian's voice was sharp, his tone cold and furious. "I told you not to involve her." "How does this have nothing to do with her?" Selena's emotions finally snapped, and she screamed, "If it wasn't for this bitch, you would never have cancelled the engagement with me. Brian, we've been together for years. You've only known her for a few months. Are the 2 months you've spent with her worth more than the 10 years we've shared?" "It's not about time," Brian replied icily. "We both know the truth about our engagement, it was just a business deal. I never had any feelings for you. But I love you." Selena's voice cracked as she cried out. Her face, once flawless, now looked disheveled with smeared makeup and tears running down her face. She looked nothing like the poised woman she once was. "All because of you. It's all because of you, you bitch. I'm going to kill you." She was so used to being dominant that, even now, she refused to hold back. I cried and retreated, tears clinging to my perfectly applied lashes. Brian couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed Selena and pulled her away from me. "Stop losing it," he snapped. Selena was shoved onto the table, her face a mix of disbelief and heartbreak as she looked at him, her voice cracking with emotion. "Brian, how can you do this to me? You have no heart," she cried. But Brian didn't seem to care about her nearly shattered state. He hurried to my side, gripping my shoulders and checking me over anxiously. "Are you okay? She didn't hurt you, did she?" he asked. I shook my head and lowered my gaze, nestling into his chest, pretending to be distressed. When he wasn't looking, I shot Selena a look, raising an eyebrow and smiling slyly. Selena gritted her teeth in hatred. "Brian, the Livingston family will never approve of you breaking the engagement," she spat. Brian wrapped his arms around me and glanced at her with cold indifference. "The shares of the company are in my hands. I don't need anyone's approval," he said flatly. "Selena, I'll say this one more time, Monica has nothing to do with this. I'm the one who developed feelings for her. I'm the one who pursued her. Consider this my last warning, don't come after her again. You know the consequences if you do." Selena's face turned pale, her mascara ruined by her tears. She clenched her lips tightly, then, sobbing, she turned and pushed open the door to leave in a flurry of humiliation. Brian continued to comfort me. And as he held me, I grinned and slipped my phone into my pocket. I'd messaged him as soon as Selena reached out to me. I just hadn't expected him to arrive so quickly. When a man doesn't love someone, he can be ruthless, even cruel. But I liked it. Being with Brian brought me happiness in ways I hadn't anticipated. Some of the things we supposedly had in common, I had found out from his earlier social media posts. But some of it was genuinely stuff I liked as well. We shared many interests, and although not everything was exactly the same, being with him felt comfortable and never boring. We went skiing in the Alps, embracing at the foot of the snowy mountains. We flew in a hot air balloon over Tanzania, kissing under the most beautiful sunset on the horizon. I even found myself truly enjoying fishing. Brian had postponed all of his meetings so he could go deep-sea fishing for tuna with me. After I hooked a big one, but couldn't hold on to the rod, he came to help. We both fumbled and ended up falling on top of each other, laughing together as we watched the fish swim away. At night, we held hands and wandered through the supermarket. To my surprise, despite looking like a pampered heir, Brian was quite the cook. "My signature seafood risotto, try it," he said, beaming as he wore the gray loungewear I had bought for him. He removed the oven mitts and crouched down to peel shrimp for Angel, grumbling playfully. "Why do I have to feed you piece by piece? You weren't this spoiled when you were a stray." Angel nuzzled his hand with a wagging tail, and Brian couldn't help but smile. His dark hair fell loosely over his forehead, softening his sharp features, and his eyes were warm. The dim light cast a golden glow over him and Angel, and I froze for a moment, struck by how peaceful they looked. That night, after Brian had fallen asleep, I didn't sneak into his study. Brian had no idea I was going through his things. His company's important documents were all kept at home, and I knew the password to his computer. For the past few days, I had been digging through the files of Selena's father's company. The two families had worked together for years, and I didn't believe Brian didn't have something on Selena's father. As I suspected, I had found traces of tax evasion and even evidence that Selena's father was transferring illegal assets overseas. But I hadn't yet uncovered conclusive proof. However, tonight I hesitated. Brian was genuinely a good person, and their families had been tied together for years. If I took down Selena's father, the Livingston family would inevitably suffer as well. I found that, unexpectedly, my heart was starting to waver. I had always thought that I was just using Brian, that I had no real feelings for him. But after spending so much time with him, I couldn't tell anymore if I truly liked him or not. His love was sincere and gentle. After confirming his feelings, he didn't hesitate to cut ties with Selena, not holding back for the sake of the family business. He made it clear to her in front of me, even defending me when she was there. Liking him had always been too easy. I knew that once I made a move on Selena's father, there was no turning back for us. Our relationship wouldn't survive that. Brian was too proud to forgive me for betraying him. But could I really just stand by and watch Selena live a smooth, perfect life? Without Brian, she still had her parents. She would never suffer. I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep the entire night. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the heavy curtains and into my eyes, I squinted, feeling Brian stir behind me. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his voice soft and tender. "Good morning, my beautiful little kitten." He reached over to gently pet Angel, who was curled up by his head. "Good morning to you, too." Angel stretched, letting out a big yawn, her little body stretching out in the cutest way. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "Brian, what's the one thing you can't stand the most about us being together?" Brian, still not wanting to get out of bed, mumbled groggily with a hoarse voice. "The one thing I can't stand? The one thing you can't stand is me lying to you, right?" When the doorbell rang, I thought it was Brian. I smiled and laughed, holding Angel as I went to open the door. You know, Angel's been craving snacks all morning, but I froze when I saw who was standing there. It was Selena, and she was holding Brian's arm. Brian pulled his arm back immediately, his gaze locking with mine. His eyes were cold and indifferent now, no trace of the warmth he once had. My heart sank, and I instinctively gripped tighter onto Angel. The cat squirmed uncomfortably, letting out a sharp meow and jumping out of my arms. "Do you have anything else to say, Rachel?" Selena sneered, shaking a folder in her hand. I could vaguely see my picture in it. "I thought you looked familiar." Her lips twisted into a disdainful smile. "I knew it. You've always been the type to seduce men, haven't you? A tramp, just like always." She yanked at Brian's arm. "I told you she was just using you. She's here for revenge against me." Brian's eyes fixed on mine, and as the light dimmed, I couldn't read his expression anymore. His silhouette was blurred in the dark, but I could sense the gravity of the moment. "I had someone look into it," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "My computer was tampered with. My studies files were also touched. You told me you liked the same writer as me, that you liked skiing. These were things I posted on my social media in college. Rachel, tell me, is that just a coincidence?" In that moment, I knew there was nothing left for me to say. I stood there for a long time, staring at him, my lips curling into a self-mocking smile. "I knew you would find out eventually. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. Brian, this wasn't a coincidence. I got close to you to take revenge on Selena. But now that the truth's out, I have nothing left to hide." Selena smirked. "Rachel, trash is trash. Don't expect time to change you." She walked up to me and patted my face mockingly. "You think I'll face any consequences? People like you, from the bottom of society, aren't even human. Your existence is just wasting air. You should be grateful that you could even be of use to me. Want to get back at me?" She leaned in closer to my ear, a triumphant smile on her lips. "Try again in your next life." We had only been together for 2 months, but somehow, my things at home had gradually accumulated without me realizing it. The pajamas Brian bought for me, along with the fuzzy slippers he'd prepared for winter, a pair, one white and one gray, arranged side by side like matching couple slippers. There were the pink and blue couple mugs with a heart in the middle, something I had teased as tacky, and after I took one, the other remained abandoned and incomplete. The matching pajamas hanging together, the pillows leaning against each other, the little blanket folded on the coffee table, as though still waiting for us to use it. standing in the living room. I suddenly felt an inexplicable ache in my chest, a silent pain I couldn't quite put into words. It was clear to me that all of this was fake. And yet, somewhere along the way, I had fallen into it so much so that it felt real. I closed my eyes and picked up the 2 large suitcases, walking out. As I brushed past Brian, he suddenly spoke, asking a strange question: "Do you feel pain?" I replied indifferently, "And what if I do? Will you help me?" He fell silent. I wiped my eyes, opened the door, and left. I wandered aimlessly, dragging my luggage behind me. I didn't know where I was headed, my mind blank. When water hit my eyes, I looked up in confusion and realized it had started raining at some point. Pedestrians on the street scrambled to take cover, and the dim evening light cast a melancholy shadow over the city. The red taillights of passing cars shimmered in the puddles, reflecting soft ripples. I stood in the rain, unmoving, for what seemed like an eternity. Eventually, I crouched down and hugged myself. My revenge was unsuccessful, and I had thrown my own feelings away. It was like losing everything, twice. But life seemed to mock me further. I had caught a cold from the rain and was now lying in bed, feverish and muddled, too lazy to even go get medicine. Perhaps it was the illness, but suddenly, a wave of intense self-loathing surged inside me, and everything felt pointless. Maybe death would be easier, I thought. If I were dead, I wouldn't have to deal with all this pain. As I drifted in and out of sleep, my phone rang. I reached for it with difficulty, hearing faint voices on the other end, saying something. Maybe I said something too. But my brain was so foggy I couldn't remember a single thing. Time seemed to pass without me noticing. Eventually, I heard a door creak open, and I tried to open my eyes, but it felt as though I was floating in the sea, unable to move at all. A cool hand touched my forehead, and after some faint rustling sounds, someone gently helped me sit up, slipping a pill into my mouth and coaxing softly in my ear, "Be good. Take your medicine." I furrowed my brow and swallowed, taking a few sips of water from the hand that held it, then was carefully laid back down. In my half-sleep, I sensed a pair of eyes watching me, unwavering. I felt a little hot, so I kicked off the blanket, exposing my arm. My arm was covered in scars, the burns from Selena's cigarette, the cuts from an X-Acto knife. And there was a deep scar on my wrist. That one I had carved myself after Grandma passed away. After being rushed to the hospital for a day and night, I never went to find her. I was left alone in this cold and cruel world. Throughout my time with Brian, I had always worn long sleeves. Even my pajamas were long-sleeved. He had never seen these scars. The gaze lingered on my hand, unmoving. After a long while, I felt a careful touch on my cheek, a trembling fingertip. I leaned into it. A tear slipping down my face. "Grandma," I whispered, curling up. "It hurts." The hand froze, as if jolted by electricity. A long sigh came from above me, tinged with a soft, painful sorrow. The warm, damp sensation on my face spread through my hair. When I woke up, the sky had already turned dark. I had slept the entire day. I touched my forehead, it felt cool. The fever had finally subsided. I glanced over at the nightstand. A cup of water sat there, now only half full and completely cold. Beside it was a lone fever-reducing pill, missing its pair. The next day, I returned home. The house was empty and silent. The only thing on the coffee table was a thick file folder. I walked over and pulled out the papers inside. Dozens of pages were filled with evidence of Selena's father's illegal activities over the years. I picked up my phone and opened the chat from yesterday morning with my friend. "Call Brian later and tell him that when you tried to reach me, my voice sounded off. Like I was sick. My friend replied quickly, "Okay. I reported Selena's father for tax evasion, directly sending the evidence online. Along with that, I exposed evidence of his involvement in ordering a hit on a competitor and the case of Selena's brother, who had drugged and raped a girl, resulting in her death due to an overdose. These incidents were from years ago. Back then, they used money and connections to cover it all up, leaving the victims helpless. The situation sparked a massive public outcry. People on the internet were enraged, with hundreds of thousands of comments in the news sections demanding severe punishment for the criminals. Before any results could come out, other competitors of Selena's father started leaking more of their wrongdoings. They revealed cases of bribery, stealing trade secrets, illegal competition, and more. In the past, the Livingston family had protected them, so no one dared to oppose Selena's family. But now, with the Livingston family openly opposing them, everyone saw an opportunity and started piling on. I uploaded a long video to YouTube recounting how Selena had bullied me. After watching, viewers were furious. This whole family is filled with villains, not a single good person. It's not that justice wasn't done. It's just that the right time hadn't come. They did so many evil things in the past, and now they're facing their karma. We all support you. I was also bullied before, and my bullies got what they deserved. I hope you'll find peace soon. Soon, Selena and her family became the target of public hatred. Her parents and brother were summoned and detained by the court. But Selena managed to escape. Her father had moved some assets overseas years ago, and she planned to escape abroad, continuing her life as a wealthy heiress, living in luxury. But on her way to the airport, the police caught up with her. In her panic, she sped up and crashed into a bridge pillar, losing consciousness on impact. When they managed to revive her in the hospital, they discovered that her spine had been damaged, leaving her paralyzed from the neck down, unable to move from the shoulders down. The next time I saw Selena, she was lying alone in a rented apartment. Because she couldn't pay her medical bills, Selena had long been kicked out of the hospital. This small room was rented by some relatives, who had just thrown her in and left without a second thought. I bent down as I entered the damp basement. It had rained a few days ago, and the ceiling, covered in black mold, was dripping water down onto the floor. A rat, startled by my footsteps, scurried quickly into the dark, stinking sewer. Selena lay on the bare wooden bed, her face twisting in pain when she saw me enter. She tried to move, but couldn't. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't. At first, when I found out Selena hadn't died, I felt a little regretful. But now, I didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. This was better. I stood there for a moment, taking in her miserable state. She deserved to live like this, in pain, in hopelessness, paying for the sins she'd committed. Selena was strong, though. Despite everything, she hadn't lost her mind. She stared at me with a look of pure hatred, one I had never seen before. I honestly thought if she could move, she might leap at me and bite me to death. Selena, do you regret it? I asked, looking down at her from above. Regret? She curled her lips into a strange, mocking smile, glaring at me. I only regret why I didn't kill you back then. Rachel, you slut. You were born to be a lowlife. It's not my fault your life is miserable. Why should I regret it? Is that so? Well, it seems your life isn't so great either. I smiled, moving closer to her. Well, I've taken your man. From now on, I'll take care of him and be with him in your place. For a moment, Selena froze, her body tensing. Then she screamed, the sound like a dying animal in agony, wild and furious. Her throat soon became hoarse, gasping for air. The sound was like nails scratching on a chalkboard. Rachel, you'll go to hell, you filthy bitch, you deserve to die. Rachel, I turned and walked out of the room. Even now, Selena still didn't think she had done anything wrong. But it didn't matter. I didn't need her repentance, because I would never forgive her. Is there a God in this world? I don't know. But I know that if the God don't punish her for her crimes, then I'll be the one to do it. I raised my hand, and sunlight poured through my fingers, touching my face, cutting off the darkness and dampness behind me. The pain I endured at 17, through the endless rainy season, had finally come to an end. the sky was clear again. The Livingston family must have already been preparing to sever ties with Selena's father's company, as the scandal caused some damage to them but wasn't serious. Since handing over the documents to me, Brian had never contacted me again. He had completely vanished from my life, leaving no trace of himself behind. It was as if everything had been a dream. And now that I had awoken, he was nothing but a fading memory. Except for fishing. I had developed a habit of fishing, finding solace in it whenever I had nothing else to do. When I fished, I could calm myself down, the chaotic thoughts gradually fading away. I still liked to visit the pond Brian and I used to go to, but this time, I saw a familiar figure in the distance. Brian was there. My heart stopped for a moment, and I hesitated, not daring to approach him. He seemed to ignore me, his gaze fixed intently on the float, not even sparing me a glance. I bit my lip, unable to suppress a bitter laugh, and took a seat further away from him. What was I even hoping for? After I had lied to him, the least he could do was help me get my revenge. Was I really expecting him to still like me? Today had been unlucky. My thoughts were a mess. And after sitting for a long while without catching a single fish, I decided it was time to leave. But when I stood up, my legs suddenly went numb, and I lost my balance. I fell in the direction of a large rock on the ground, and instinctively, I protected my head. The pain I expected never came. Instead, a warm embrace, carrying a faint scent of wood, caught me. I looked up suddenly, and found myself staring into a pair of amber eyes. Ever since my grandmother's death, I hadn't cried much. Crying was for those who wanted to be pitied, but I knew the last person who would ever pity me was gone. All these years, no matter how difficult it was, I had pushed through alone. But in this moment, I felt a warmth flood my chest. And my eyes stung with unshed tears. Brian seemed to not even notice the tears falling from my eyes, his voice cold as he said, "Rachel, using the same trick twice is meaningless." He let go of me, turning to leave. I grabbed hold of him. He tried to push me away, but I refused to let go, clinging to him like an octopus. Our bodies collided, and we lost our balance, crashing to the ground. Brian instinctively protected my head. His jaw clenched as he growled, "What the hell are you doing? Let go." "I won't." I tugged at his collar, my eyes red, and shouted, "Brian, there's something I have to say." I wanted to get revenge on Selena at first, but later, I really liked you. I really like you. He glared at me, and after a long pause, he abruptly turned his head away, his tense body finally relaxing as if the air had been let out. I heard him curse for the first time. Damn it. I rolled up my sleeve to show him the scars on my arm, my eyes filled with tears. She poured boiling water on me, put out cigarette butts on my skin, took photos of me, and even caused my grandmother's death. Brian, don't you think I have every right to hate her? I hesitated later on. You don't have to forgive me, you can curse me, but I really do like you. That's the truth, and I've never lied to you about it. When Brian saw the scars on my body, the indifference in his eyes finally faltered. His fingers gently traced the marks on my skin, and he sighed in resignation, "You always pull the same stunt. You think I don't know that you pretended to be sick that day to get my sympathy? You liar," he added bitterly, "you just know I'm easy to deceive, so you keep doing it over and over." I lifted my head, cupping his face in my hands. "Then do you want to be deceived by me?" The wind from the setting sun rustled the leaves, and the distant mountains slowly cleared, revealing a pale, white moon. A kiss landed on my lips. "Fine. I'll admit defeat. But this time, if you're going to deceive me, make it for life." Not far away, a fishing rod bent as a fish bit the hook, but with no one holding the rod. The fish quickly devoured the bait and escaped. I couldn't help but smile. It didn't matter. Because the biggest catch, the one that truly mattered, was already mine.